that kingdom cannot stand. So I'll skip that kingdom, and I'll just go right to cannot stand, and then back to Matthew, is brought to desolation. It would fit better if I could say cannot stand and is brought to desolation. So I was just thinking I could switch it around and have it be is brought to desolation and cannot stand, which would also fit. And I could use that and after brought to desolation, but there's a semicolon, and that's clearly separating the idea behind the kingdom and the city or the house that comes later in that verse in Matthew. Maybe if I put every kingdom divided against itself, finish with Matthew, is brought to desolation, then have the entire last part of the verse from Mark saying that kingdom cannot stand. Every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation. That kingdom cannot stand. Yeah, that would work. I think I'm going to do that. Just that I don't have to move around the and. Mark continues on, and if a house be divided against itself, that house cannot stand. Matthew says it a bit different. He says every city or house divided against itself shall not stand. So I could use the semicolon, or I could just use the period because it's a different verse in Mark. I think I'll stick with the period. Make it a new verse. City or house. I definitely want to say city or house because that's more information being included instead of just house, as it says in Mark. I'm thinking, should I continue with the every in Matthew? I think I was going to do that. Yeah, he said, because he's laying out the truths that build up to the fact that later on in Matthew, and if Satan cast out Satan, he is divided against itself, how shall then his kingdom stand? So I'll stick with the every because he's laying out the truths, he's really forcing it. And every, okay. The and at the beginning of Mark is capitalized. And is from both. Mark, if a house. Matthew says, and every city or house. So every city or is only Matthew. Now from both, house. House divided against itself. Mark, house. B divided against itself. I'm skipping the B and just divided against itself. That house cannot stand. Or just from Matthew, shall not stand. I'll put that house cannot. Not that shall not mean like it's not allowed, or just it won't, but it cannot. It's impossible. Cannot, in this sense, would be more impactful. I think that in order to make it more of like added evidence to what was said before, every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, that kingdom cannot stand. It would make sense to now say that house cannot stand. And the only reason I wouldn't say that is because in Matthew it says every house or city shall not stand, and then he goes to say Satan cast out Satan, he is dividing himself, how shall then his kingdom stand? So it's saying shall again. It would match in Matthew. But in Mark it says cannot all three times. The kingdom cannot stand, the house cannot stand, and then speaking about Satan, he cannot stand. So I'm going to stick with that. The moment it's divided, can't happen. I don't know why, it just feels like that word is stronger than shall. Even though I know this is God, he's saying it's like from the laws of nature. God's ways are the laws of nature. So if he's saying it shall not happen, that automatically means it cannot happen. But I still like cannot. Cannot stand. So from Matthew, shall not stand. You know what? There's something weird about this one though. The reason why it fit saying every kingdom in the verse earlier is because it had the added mention of what will happen to it. They're brought to desolation. then it fit to say that kingdom cannot stand. But here, I don't think it fits as well, because you're saying every city or house divided against itself, then there's nothing added. It just goes right into that house cannot stand. So I actually don't think I like it the way it is. But I don't know how to make it work if I was to say and if. Because if it's and if, you can't say every. And if would be like a subsection of the rest. And if a house be divided against itself, that house cannot stand. If you say every house divided against it, you can't say and if every house. And you definitely can't have and if every house, that house shall not stand. That wouldn't work. But see, if I then just say shall not stand, I don't know if that would fit with how he's lining everything up as an argument, as a debate point. Every kingdom divided against itself shall be brought to desolation, that kingdom cannot stand. Every city or house divided against itself, that house cannot stand. So it's cannot stand, cannot stand. How can Satan stand? He cannot stand either. If I go, the kingdom cannot stand, if a house divided against itself, it shall not stand. How can Satan? I know how to do it. Okay, when it's speaking about Satan, I can mix these two verses in a very creative way. I could say, and if Satan cast out Satan, or I could say, if Satan rise up against himself and cast out Satan, and be divided for Mark. I can then go back to Matthew and say, how shall then his kingdom stand? Back to Mark. He cannot stand, but has an end. So I could say, how shall his kingdom stand? Question mark. Then I could say the answer to that question that he's posing, he cannot. So it's both. He shall not, he cannot. And if I'm going to do that, then it would fit here to put shall not, which means that I can still include every city or house, because I'm not putting that house cannot stand. I'm just putting, as it says in Matthew, every city or house divided against itself shall not stand. So that means I have to cut out that house cannot, and I'll just say shall. So I'm sort of getting rid of that extra mention of the house, but shall not. It has to be there in order to make it fit grammatically with the fact that there's a house and a city mentioned. And it's saying every, so I can't say every city or house, that house shall not fail. I'm saying every city or house shall not. All of them. That works. And every city or house divided against itself shall not stand. And if a house, and every, I can't just have if, and every city or house divided against itself shall not stand. It's just a statement, shall not. Every city shall not stand. The evidence was laid out, and here is what is now obvious. This is like the law of syllogism. If A equals B, B equals C, then A equals C. If this happens, and this happens, obviously this is going to happen. Or actually the way it's saying, if that can't work, this can't work, then this cannot work ever, at all. Mark 3:26. And if Satan rise up against himself and be divided, he cannot stand, but has an end. And if Satan cast out Satan, he is divided against himself. So and if is both. And if Satan, and if Satan. So that's both. Well, actually, wait, I think I was going to do that differently. If Satan rise up against himself and cast out Satan, that's what I was going to do. And if Satan rise up against himself and cast out Satan, should I say he is divided against himself, or should I say and be divided? It makes more sense to say he is divided against himself. Then I'm going to go into the question, how shall then his kingdom stand for Matthew? And then him answering his own question in Mark, he cannot stand. So, Mark only, and if Satan rise up against himself. Now from Matthew, and cast out Satan. Okay, if Satan. That first if Satan, I'll say, is both. So it's and from Mark, if Satan from both, back to Mark, rise up against himself. Then the first and from Matthew, skip what was already used in Matthew, if Satan. Then right back to what's said in Matthew, cast out Satan. Now I'm going to continue with Matthew. He is divided against himself. He is divided against himself. And then still continuing on with Matthew, he asks the question to them, the rhetorical question pretty much. How shall then his kingdom stand? Now he answers his own question in Mark. He cannot stand, but has an end. Now, he says, every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation. Every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation. Oh, perfect. That's exactly how it says here in Luke. Every orange kingdom divided against itself. Now, gray is brought to desolation. Orange. And a house divided against a house falls. So and is all three. Instead of just a house, it's every city or house. So house. The word divided is in italics in Luke. So I'll just say only the word house is all three. Against is there in Luke. So that's also gray. Now it doesn't say itself here in Luke. It says again a house. But itself is clear, just like that. Falls. So shall not stand or falls. Stand is in both. Shall not is only Matthew, but falls. I think I'm just going to have to leave out falls. Otherwise I'd have to cut out these three words. Shall not stand. And stand is in both Matthew and Mark. So I'm going to go with majority witness stand and shall not, which is necessary for the word stand, and leave out falls. Next, if Satan also be divided against himself, if Satan is all three, also, if Satan rise up against himself and cast out Satan. I could put also right after Satan, and if Satan also rise up against himself and cast out Satan, yeah, that would fit. Is that in Matthew or Mark? And if Satan cast out Satan? Nope. Mark. And if Satan rise up against Satan? Okay, so it's just Luke. But it fits just fine. Also, if Satan also rise up against himself, be divided against himself. Be is divided against himself. Actually, I don't know why I left it like this. If Satan also rise up against himself and cast out Satan, he is divided against himself. I don't think that needs to be repeated. I think I'm going to change this. And if Satan also rise up, and then just go right to and cast out Satan, he is divided against himself. Yeah. So I'm going to put against himself, which would actually make it all three. Matthew, Mark, and Luke. If Satan rise up and cast out Satan, he is divided against himself. Yeah, I think that's better. Luke has, how shall his kingdom stand? That's actually here as well. In Matthew, how shall his kingdom stand? So that's orange.